Many years ago, I was blessed as a little kid to get my hands on not only a Game Boy Color, but also a copy of Pokemon Blue. It wasn't my first console, it wasn't even my first game, but there was some little magic in that cartridge when I traveled through the digital world of Kanto. Now, decades later, and looking what has become this series that I grew up with, I can't help but be... life can be so tiring. Look, Pokemon is not a perfect series, and I've always been vocal about that. Hell, I've been playing the games and critiqued them for years as demonstrated on this very channel. I've been assaulted when trying to get Pokemon cards, so I know how terrible the Pokemon fanbase and scalpers can be with this series. But when this game came out, it honestly felt like you had to pick a side. You either thought the game sucked and it was a result of corporate greed, or you liked the parts of the game and now you're defending $1 million company. Got plenty of that in the last few weeks, but regardless of that, I'd figured today we'd actually take a look at the game, give it a critical eye, and determine if it actually is the bane of gaming. We'll even go over things in the game and maybe look at some other critiques when we get to certain parts. To give some context at things, I've managed to get over 50 hours of the game. I didn't get footage until after a little bit, and I've played my copy on the Switch too. I'm MangaKamen, and let's pick our starter. So, what exactly is Pokemon Legends ZA, and where do we fit into this? Well, obviously, we're the most interesting person in the entire world. Apparently we're named Harmony, or Paxton, but whatever, aside from the fact that we have no actual backstory in the game, who cares? We're going on vacation! And our destination is the city of Lumiose in the Kalos region. If you're not familiar with Pokemon, especially with the last few years, this is actually a bit of a sequel to the X and Y games. Lumiose City was the centerpiece of the region. There are tons of characters that return from those games in this one, and it's obvious that the narrative will make allusions to the previous titles. So, if you skipped X and Y, not that I blame people who wouldn't, you might not have the context for some things, such as the evolution of the game mechanics or storytelling. Speaking of, what is our story? Don't know! All we know is we're some random guy or gal or something in between who just packed a single bag, didn't have a hotel reservation, and we're apparently able to stay long term in the city. We didn't have any sort of plans before coming here. Not that I don't mind a blank slate of a character, but we're already seeing a bit of a downgrade from the previous Legends game, Arceus. At least our player character then was kidnapped in night and transported back in time to Hisui. This is a bit of a downgrade story-wise, but since we don't really learn anything about the protagonist in that game either, it's mostly just a storytelling device. So I choose to believe that we're on the run from our own town and region, possibly due to the debt collectors, because those apparently exist in the world of Pokemon. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather not have my thumb smashed in again. Not long after we exit the station, we meet our rival and leader of Team MZ, Tawny or Urbane. Depending on if you choose the male or female character, they'll be the opposite. So for the sake of not blowing my sanity out, I'll be using Tawny whenever I talk to them. Immediately, Tawny recruits you to join Team MZ, along with Naveen, a young man who has a passion for fashion and is a simp to the local streamer, and Lita, who's a dance student who may or may not be related to the fat character in the XY games. Eventually, you get tasked by Quasar Tico Inc. to investigate and deal with wild Mega Evolution Pokemon on their own, while at the same time claiming the ranks of the ZA Royale, a citywide tournament being held where the goal is to find the strongest Mega Evolution trainer. As a basic premise, it's not that bad. A little generic, especially by Pokemon standards, mainly because we're usually some snot-nosed brat who's going out on a journey around the region, collecting 8 gym badges, fighting an evil team, somehow save the entire world, and then become the champion of said region. That's obviously not the case here, and while I definitely have my issues with some choices in the story later, as well as the missed opportunities that ZA could have, I'm willing to give some credit to where it's due and at least say it's something different, especially in consideration of what Legend Arceus was doing. Unfortunately, the premise does have a bit of an issue going on with it, and that would be the tutorial. If there's one aspect to games that I have an issue with, especially with today's standards, it's how often some games can be slow at the start. Whether it be because the narrative of the game is trying to establish itself for the characters, or because it's trying to teach you how to play the game, because Lord knows there have been plenty of players in the world who skip out on tutorials and then blame the game.
I don't hate tutorials. I hate very visible, frustrating, slow tutorials.
Okay.
Hovering over
all of them.
No, well, it's a lot of them, yeah, because people are lazy. Didn't you ever see my video?
They'll get frustrated because the game apparently didn't explain things to them. It's not even so much of a hindrance, if I'm honest, because despite people claiming that most people would press A to jump in a game, that's mostly for games that allow it. Otherwise, and especially for the Legends series, which is apparently a part of the mainline games of Pokemon, I think tutorials are a bit of a necessary thing, since from what we've seen, both this one and the previous game play differently from the traditional turn-based ones. Pokemon isn't a stranger to the curse of tutorials. Ever since Pokemon Sun and Moon, with what Lily basically slapping a dog collar around your neck and forcing you to sit and stay, tutorials in Pokemon Pokemon have been of a heatbed for criticism on it. The idea is that once you get your starter, you should be allowed to explore the world at your own pace, catching these colorful little creatures, stuffing them in the balls, and then putting them in somehow legal fights with other 10-year-olds. And while I'm not totally against that idea, the freedom part, not having your pets do battle, you need to understand the following. Every game is someone's first game. Whether it be yours or not, consideration is key for people getting into these. There are drastic changes from the standard with Pokemon's movement abilities, structure for how to handle quests, and of course the catching and battling system, especially in comparison to Arceus, is vastly different. What should matter is the execution of the tutorial. Online, I've seen people complain about the fact that the tutorial took them about 2 hours to get through, sometimes 3 hours. I even had one bozo in the back of the room who I think was sniffing a few too many dog collars, claiming it was 4 hours long.
I think the tutorial is incredibly long, like it's very handholdy here at the start, which is just like, come on, let me have some freedom.
While I don't have my own personal footage of the tutorial, I have no idea what these people are going on about. It's probably a me thing, but I've never really got the vibe of the introduction tutorial being all that egregious, especially for Pokemon standards in Legend ZA. At least I can play with some of the mechanics of the game, the story's setting up, and in my opinion, I do believe that if you go with the flow of it, at least at the beginning, you'll have a better time overall. Heck, I only recall being in the tutorial for about an hour, if even that. What people and reviewers need to understand is that your own experience doesn't discount the experience of other people, and that applies to me too. Though that doesn't mean that you can't raise issues with how other people talk about their experiences. That being said, you know for a fact that most people, if they weren't told that they didn't have to hold down the B button to run, they'd still be keeping their thumb on that poor button. I do believe that people are exacerbating the severity of this tutorial. We live in a time where people's attention spans last the average length of a TikTok, and I know some people out there are using this as background footage while they draw. Yeah, I know that you're doing that, and I get it. Time is a valid resource, and some people would rather not sink an hour or two into a tutorial, but I didn't feel that way. I saw some people online complain about the fact that they were still in the tutorial, even though by their own admission they were wasting extra time in that time frame. I don't know, it just seems kind of weird to complain about the tutorial taking so much time when you admit to doing that. Personally, I felt the tutorial blended into the actual story pretty decently, and its pacing was fine. Of course, I'm a weirdo who still hasn't figured out how life and social cues work, such as finding out that Pokemon scalpers don't shower in the worst way possible. But one thing to note is that the game doesn't exactly tell you everything in the tutorial. This is a plus and a detriment though. I'll go more in depth in later, but I don't really recall the C+ moves being brought up in this part. A new mechanic that while you're battling an opponent and once you get your Mega Ring, you can use Mega Energy to strengthen some of your moves. I was told about C+ moves in one of the missions after I had to face a Rouge Mega evolution, and part of the reason why I'm not going in depth with the missions is because honestly they serve more of a narrative purpose or act as mini tutorials for Pokemon, moves, and mechanics down the line to help you get an idea on how the game works more in depth. And the game does teach you more about certain mechanics or how the moves work in the game via side missions that you get. Now let's get to the real issue that people have with this game, and that's the presentation and graphics. Listen, I'm not going to try to defend the world choices here. I've played games where the majority of the story and gameplay were tied to one or two major city locations, and in that we're exposed to a lot more detail and personality of the cities, to the point where the cities themselves felt like characters in the game. Flat textures on the buildings, the streets of Lumio City tend to blend together, and the wild areas, while an interesting idea, don't really fulfill their potential, as I'll explain later. That being said,
this whole city is one 3D model that's rendered in at all times.
So, fun fact, the Reddit post that this million-plus YouTuber beat-em-ups used an article that has no sources. An article that referenced deleted tweets after misinformation. It just says people on Twitter, which,
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
Franchise that I grew up with turn into a social media war zone every single time somebody tries to criticize the game. A half a dozen self-appointed defenders come out swinging, calling it grifting, misinformation, or some coordinated smear campaign against the Pokemon Company. It's just so stupid.
Hell, I guess Pokemon fans can't never be right about misinformation. Even though the account in that screenshot, PoriLeaks, came out and said the information wasn't true and the single model was actually being used for the opening cutscene of the game. I don't know, I feel like when you are purposely spreading misinformation, not bothering to do the legwork to check to see if people were right about this, then you have to forgive me for thinking that there isn't actually a reason to grift off this game. To me, I don't understand why you would include something like this in your review. Not only is it not potentially true, but it makes me question if you actually care about being honest. You don't need to include potential misinformation in your videos to tell me that the game doesn't look up to snuff to today's standards. I don't know if you know this, but I've got eyes. But hey, just keep flaunting that "stop defending the billionaire company" meme like that means anything in this situation. It really makes your side look so good. Back to the game proper, the textures on the buildings aren't great, and apparently it's just one random building that has actual depth and balconies to it. I don't know why, but it's friggin' weird. The thing is, there are unique buildings and locations in the game, and the interiors that you can go into are actually pretty nice looking with details. Hotel Z being a prime example. The Rust Syndicate's base also has its own memorable design. The underground lab that you get into late in the game and the sewers stick out in my head. That being said, the game really could have done a lot more of the actual locations and made them a lot more memorable. Add more interior dungeons and expand on the world inside the buildings. I've disliked this about Pokemon for a while, and it isn't just a thing in the 3D games, but the mundanity of the world of Pokemon. Pokemon to me has always been at its best when it really plays around with its environments. Sword and Shield had a lot of issues when it came to presentation of the world. Most notably, the wild area would have a lot of cheap textures, lacking presentation, and of course, that fucking tree. But when it came to the actual design work of the towns and such, there were some gems in there. Spikemuth with its dank and dirty neon streets, Balonlay with its colorful mushrooms and foresty location, Hammerlock being a huge castle town. X and Y also had notable locations outside of Lumio City. Anastar City with the huge crystal sundial that points you towards Megastones, the Tower of Mastery where players go to learn the history of Mega Evolution. My point is, Lumio City could stand at a bit more definition to its landmarks, and there could have been a simple way to do this. One of the wild areas in the game basically transforms a random park area into a frigid wasteland because a ton of ice-type Pokemon moved into the area and are freezing it over. It's one of the more distinct locations in the world map because it actively changes the environment. Now, imagine if other areas did the same thing. An area gets taken over by bug and grass-type Pokemon. We see all these webs strewn across the buildings with grass and trees becoming larger and thicker. Kakuna and Weedle hanging out of the trees. Or how about the electric Pokemon? Instead of taking over the local power plant, they take over a street, and with a newly electrical currents added into it, the metal in the location floats up. A haunted street with purple lighting and everything looks so dingy because of the ghost Pokemon. My point is, you can have a boring city in the game at the start, but as you progress through the game, the city evolves. Hell, have a street get taken over by wild fighting type Pokemon, and the street's a mess with broken windows in parts of the city because the fighting types are training with each other. Something to add personality and such to the actual world would be amazing. If the games are going to be graphically simple, then at the very least, Pokemon should lean more into the creative and artistically distinct world. Just do something, Game Freak. I know you've done this in the past, so why can't you do it now? You do it for your character design, so why not this? Back on the Game Boy, the GBA, and even the DS, the games could get away with that because they were effectively trying to do a more down-to-earth RPG series, which is understandable considering that Creatures Inc., before they became Creatures, they were Ape, and they made the Earthbound series of games, which were more down-to-earth based RPGs, and that DNA got spliced into Pokemon. In my head, that's why Mega Starmie is the way it is, because it's looking up to Starman. But nowadays, Pokemon does need to up its game quite literally with their world design, because if you're expecting me to pay $70 for this game on the Switch 2, then there does need to be a bit more effort put into this. I don't want to be smacked upside the head by Nintendo's terrible business practices, and I get treated like a simp for the company simply because I don't fully agree with every critique levied at some individual games. There are some positives in the game world. While there are plenty of NPCs who do just stand around like they're statues of your average grifter slop YouTube channel, there are some NPCs that actually do walk around with Pokemon. Others do moves like they're taking pictures or exercising or even jogging. Pop in and out is a bit of an issue in the game, but I never really paid it any mind. I have seen people online getting stuck behind NPCs that do load in the game, and that's a problem, yeah. Not gonna deny that, but the game gives you a fast travel system, so even if you do get stuck, you don't need to worry about it. People do tend to highlight the issues. Sometimes when you see a clip online of a glitch or such, people will blow it up and make it seem like it's a worldwide issue, and most of the time, not really. In comparison to Scarlet and Violet, ZA was a relatively bug-free game for me, and before you ask, my girlfriend got the Switch 1 version of the game and never had any issues like that. On a performance level, the game ran smoothly for the most part, especially when I docked it on a television. Another fact about the city is that you can encounter wild Pokemon around the streets, either in the streets themselves, in the trees, the back alleys, or even the waterways. Of course, there are also Pokemon on the rooftops that you have to get to, either through ladders or the hollow elevators that are set up in the city. There's also these crates that are set up by the local construction company, which, while they do break up the monotony of the streets, I feel they could have done a lot more with them. There are some locations that there are colorful screws, and we'll talk about them later, but once you get the screws, so long as the area isn't necessary to get to a rooftop, the construction equipment should have been removed and added added a new area, like a new shop, a statue, or maybe even some wall art to help make the world evolve. Which leads us to the actual gameplay. Yes, the part of the video that the person has been waiting for. Well, boys and girls and all in between, let's buckle up because I have a lot to say. Control-wise, the game is good. Movement in the game is fluid, and when you're actually able to move around the city and explore it, you're fast, to the point where you can get from one side of the city to the other in a couple of minutes. Not that I think that's a bad thing inherently. One of my biggest complaints with Pokemon, especially the older titles, is that they're too slow with their movement. Plus, as I said, it's a great addition to have the running just be a single button press and you keep running until you stop moving. Took about 15 years to get that going, but I'm glad to see that Game Freak is keeping up with the trends. You do have some standard movements, a dodge roll to move around and not be hit by Pokemon attacks in the wild areas and battles, and a crouch that you can hide from Pokemon and trainers. No dedicated jump, but Pokemon and platforming to me hasn't been the best. Arceus, Scarlet, and Violet did add a lot more to the movement. Stuff like climbing, gliding, and riding your Pokemon will always be great, and it is a downgrade that we can't have that stuff in ZA. One can say that the map is so small that if you had that method, it would be even faster to move around, it would make the map feel even smaller. I don't agree with that per se. All you'd really have to do is allow that ability to be more endgame content, because at that point you'd probably have seen what most of the city has, and offering a faster method to get around would be a must-have. Then again, quick travel is a thing in the game, so make of it as you will. Later in the game, we unlock a new movement ability where you use your Rotom Foam to help you propel through the air. It is a bit janky, and how to explain it, it's a good kind of janky to me. This game doesn't have traditional platforming of having the character jump, which makes sense to some degree. While there are some people in the Pokemon world who do have superhuman abilities, I mean, one look at Ash Ketchum being able to carry a 13-foot log, or looking at Pokemon that should theoretically weigh a lot, most of the people in the Pokemon world are normal humans. It's not like we're one character in this game that can punch down iron gates or walls. Frickin' Ivor. So it does make sense that you, the player character, can't just jump 10 feet into the air. Does it make it a good game design? No, not really. The movement abilities in the game are passable, but if we actually do a comparison to Arceus' movements or even Scarlet and Violet's, it is limited to hell. I personally would have allowed the player to eventually get something like climbing gloves, an equipment ability that would allow them to climb up the side of buildings, albeit at a slower rate than the Holovators and even the ladders, since climbing takes a bit more time to execute. At least then you'd allow the player to have more movement, and you'd have an excuse as to why the buildings are flat. It'd be one of the movement capabilities of the game. I'd also have a means to traverse water. There are a few waterways here and there, and I think having a bit something like underwater canals would be a good idea to include and expand the world a bit more. There is a huge river that does flow through Yulmio City, and it should be utilized a lot more, especially with exploration. As for something like a glide, I think you could have included something like that in the game too, especially considering the rooftops being a prominent aspect of the world. But let's actually get to the biggest change of the game, the combat system. Gone are the turn-based battles, and in turn more real-time ones where you as the player are also key in this. Instead of operating on a turn-based system, the moves Pokemon use are more or less set to be on cooldowns, which have their own time limits and are affected by a Pokemon's speed stat. When you use a move, depending on if it's long range or close range, the Pokemon will either run to a marked position on the battlefield or run up to its opponent to attack. It sounds simple, and at the beginning of the game it is, since most of the Pokemon you come across are really weak.
It's just brain dead easy button mashing like shit. It is nowhere near as engaging as I wanted it to be, like where, you know, you actually have agency, where you can have your Pokemon actually dodge shit instead of, you know, most of the moves from the AI Pokemon just being like lock on, so it doesn't even really matter if you move around, they're just gonna hit you anyway.
Well, while the wild and opponent Pokemon do have lock-on, you can actually make it so they can miss attacks. You see, in order to launch attacks against a Pokemon or an item on the field, you need to lock onto it. That changes up the control scheme, basically what I'll call a movement versus battle scheme. As long as you're not locked onto anything, which only happens if you're holding onto the lock on button, your Pokemon will follow you around the battlefield, and you can use this to your advantage because once a Pokemon launches an attack, they're stuck with it until the animation is through. It can allow you to dodge attacks quite easily, especially since some attacks do have this charge up animation to them. Or you can use the location of the battle to your advantage. This comes up in the wild areas and even battle zones, but you can use stuff like cars, trees, rocks, bushes, or what have you to block some attacks. Note, I say some because there are a number of attacks that do not give a shit about it. It's not an automatic hit when an attack is launched. Location is important in this battle system. The only time it isn't is when it's deep water, because most non-aquatic Pokemon get a small raft that pops up underneath them in order to fight over the water. One could argue that it's a dumb thing to do since it removes realism, but another argument can be made that if it was done, then it'd probably lock off tons of moves and Pokemon from being able to fight on the water. Other factors you have to consider is your Pokemon size, aka its hitbox. Alpha Pokemon make a return in this game, which are bigger Pokemon that have max IVs in their HP, so they have a lot more health. but they also come with bigger hitboxes for being hit, as well as when they attack with certain moves, mostly physical ones, that hitbox increases as well. They offer some great AoE with their attacks, which are important when dealing with a mass of wild Pokemon or fighting people online. And no, I don't mean fighting people on Twitter, I mean the actual online battle stuff. Because of these changes, a lot of Pokemon have actually become quite viable. Take Glaceon for example. In the games it's got a great special attack, but because of its ice typing and piss poor speed stat, it never had any real viability in the older games. But since speed is related to cooldown, a smaller hitbox as even an alpha Pokemon, and its massive special attack boost, Glaceon has become a little terror on the online scene despite it not even having a Mega Evolution. And there are others out there that have been given an actual niche strategy because of this change. Players in the game actually have input on what happens in the battles a lot more than just picking the right moves. And while eventually you'll get to the point where you'll be over-leveled at the end of the game and can one-shot anything in to fulfill the missions, there's actual strategy required in the placement. Hell, you have to take into account size and where your Pokemon launches the attack. There have been a few times where beam attacks will miss because of Pokemon being too tall and the smaller Pokemon is too close. I think this actually requires a bit more thought when you're actually getting to the middle of the game and you can't just power on through unless you do some grinding, which honestly I didn't have to do throughout the game. I thought the pacing of difficulty was actually pretty good, with only a few standout moments with Rouge Mega Pokemon and a few of the higher ranks of the ZA Royale, like Corbo, being a bit of a wall end there. I'm not saying the game is balls to the wall hard, but I certainly felt a lot more engaged with the combat since it requires a lot more attention. Now, I'm a guy who enjoys turn-based content of Pokemon, much like how I enjoy things like Diet Pepsi Caffeine Free, diabetes, or sniffing glue. I enjoy turn-based content of Pokemon. It's good relaxing time for me, and while I find more challenges done with the combat system to be more engaging than fan games and ROM hacks, ZA does give a breath of fresh air, especially when you consider Legends Arceus, which while had a more dynamic gameplay outside of combat, well, with the movement and even crafting that was going on, it still did turn-based combat. Albeit it was done differently from the mainline games with agile and strong attack styles, but it still essentially had the same core elements of the original games. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows though, because there's a bit of an issue with the lock-on mechanic with the game. Namely, it can be a bit finicky if you're trying to lock onto an enemy unless you have the camera lined up with the correct space. There were a few times that even the enemy was the only other thing I could lock onto on the screen and the lock-on simply wouldn't work. I don't know how you managed to screw this up when Link was able to catch bats with a lock-on ability over 2 decades ago, but I guess here we go. And now that I've effectively made a good 90% of my audience feel old, the lock-on in ZA wasn't the worst issue in the game, because the camera is movable. You'll have to be quick to do this too though, and thanks to the right stick, if you say lock onto this random rock, you'll switch to the next available target in the direction where you push the stick. And I get it, it's a tantalizing rock, but I think when you're in an actual battle, the AI of the game should be able to have a priority on actual enemies rather than the rock. Again though, tantalizing rock. It's got a small bit of jank to the combat, but it's something that can easily be accommodated, and when it becomes a bit of a puzzle of when you need to lock on to attack and when you need to unlock to dodge attacks. I plan on talking about the Rouge Mega Evolutions in a later segment, but I feel like we should talk about the ZA Royale portion. This is where you battle against trainers at night in the streets of Lumiose. And here's where a different mechanic comes into play. Stealth and preemptive attacks. Basically, every trainer in the cordon-off area will have a Pokemon out, and you're allowed to have your Pokemon attack the opposing monster. If you do, you get a sneak attack where it does damage, and you get a small window to deliver another attack when the combat actually starts. It does add a bit more to the sneaking around mechanics. However, if another trainer spots you, and only you, then your Pokemon typically gets stunned and they get a free shot on you. I say typically because there were a few times where my Pokemon was about to deliver an attack, the trainer spotted me, and it just cancelled out. I can't be too sure if that's an actual thing or the game decided to take pity on me, but it wouldn't be the first time when someone sees me they'd have to do a double take. I wouldn't say it's a great system, since for some reason when the opposing trainer sees a random Lucario or Greninja strolling up to their Pokemon, I guess it doesn't elicit any sort of suspicion, at least until a foot gets delivered to the side of their pet Stunfisk's head. I can imagine though that from a gameplay perspective, it'd be a pain in the ass if you try to get those sneak attacks in that your opponent sees your Pokemon and gets them the priority. It's an either you do or die with this. Do you go with a realistic element, or do you say screw it and let the players have fun? And why, pray, do you do these battles with the ZA Royale? Why climb the ranks to the ZA? It's to become the strongest Mega Evolution user. Every time you defeat a trainer, you get points that lead up to a challenge ticket, and you get medals when the night ends is immediately exchanged for money, which, depending on how many trainers you defeated, helps out giving a modifier. Now, I know this may sound fine on paper, with much how like things go, eventually tedium will set in, which is why...
So to get to A rank, you beat up trainers, you earn tickets, they eventually let you take on a qualifying trainer, that bumps up your rank to the next level. It's a fun idea, but it's a little repetitive, because it's the alphabet. It's not like, oh, I am in E class, I need to get up to A and maybe to S. No, you're at Z class. Your goal is A class. That's, correct me if I'm wrong, 26 freaking ranks. And it really, really rarely actually changes. The amount of tickets you have goes up, but it's a repetitive gameplay loop.
As I was about to say, the game decides at one point and allows you to skip a number of ranks, from V to F, so you don't gotta do it 26 times in the main story. Honestly, I feel like this is a bit of a missed opportunity, because while I understand the need to avoid the grind, you could have had some good storytelling here. I'll have more with this to the story section of the game, but let's consider you had the option of skipping the ranks you got here. If you refuse to take the ranks and grind up to the actual level, you'd have to grind, but the game could reward you with additional scenes with the main cast or even introduce other characters, content that wouldn't be available until the post-game. But if you did take it, not only would you skip a ton of content, but you'd also draw the ire of the locals of Lumios. As we see in the Battle Royale, there are a ton of people who compete. People who work in the city, including the local nurses who heal your Pokemon and even act as shopkeepers who sell you Pokeballs and other items. When word gets out that you've skipped a ton of letters to get where you are, you're kinda treated like a cheater. People would have resentment towards you and would reflect that in the real world. NPCs would be a little bit colder to you and maybe even have the prices of items be a bit more expensive. I mean, if you're so good, you can eat the costs, right? Isn't that a social credit system? Well, yeah, but this game has the frickin' anti-homeless benches in the game, so I think that might just be a sign of things. Plus, with the NPC saying some of the craziest shit out there.
This dude just wants to smell Pokemon. This girl wants to be reincarnated as a Pokemon. I don't even want to know what this guy's on about. Hey, for water type moves, do you think Pokemon use their sweat or other bodily fluids? Bro, what the fuck? People, Pokemon, we're all gonna die someday, aren't we? Eyes. Aim for the eyes. Those were my brother's last words. If I'm upset, giving my partner's Pokeball a little squeeze helps.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the freaking frogs gay!
I can't be sure that there isn't something in the water.
Do you understand that?
Conspiracy theories aside, I think that in a gameplay sense, this is both a step back and a step forward for Pokemon. Exploration of the world has been drastically limited, especially in comparison to that of Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. I feel like having more tools at your disposal would be a good idea, like you get the ability to smash rocks, wash away sludge puddles, and burn down thorny bushes in the game, so why not incorporate that more into the world? Have more areas where you have to use your Pokemon to help access them. Have a little fun with details like expansions of the world itself. Hell, I was actually impressed that in order to enter the sewers the first time, you had to use Ice Beam on a fountain to get to it. Now, if it wasn't just locked behind a story section and you could do more of these kinds of things, it'd actually add to the exploration of the world and have players experiment with their Pokemon and their moves. On the other hand, I do think there are a lot of positives with the changes to the battle system. While type matchups are still important, a good movement and reaction speed is necessary. Hell, even when you're calling back your Pokemon and sending out a new one, that's a necessity to wait for the right moment, dumbass. Because when you send out another Pokemon, it will do an unskippable intro animation. And while I haven't seen any opponent's Pokemon actually attack while the animation plays, it does lock onto your Pokemon, and the moment the animation ends, your opponent attacks. So you have to be able to discern not only when the best time to switch is, preferably when your opponent launches an attack while they're stuck in their animation, you can swap out without worry, as well as the location of where you call your Pokemon. Also, I'm sure this is an intended mechanic to nerf switching. Without it, it would be way too easy to swap to resist immunities or resistances or get out of attacks completely, even when they had limited switching 3 times per life in the PvP mode. But before I continue and lose my track of mind, I feel like there's a good change of pace for the series. Is it the best combat I've ever played? Nah, but then again, nothing's gonna be able to top Metal Gear Rising or Devil May Cry 5 in my book. Also, while the game can be grindy, if you collect those colorful screws I brought up, you can exchange them for things called Canary plushes for different colors, which give you bonuses to things like getting more EXP, more money, take less damage from wild Pokemon, earn more Mega Shards that can get you stuff like Mega Stones and etc. The aforementioned platforming to get them is janky and limited, since the only upgrade you get is a Rotom Phone glide that can only be activated while you're falling, but I don't know, I actually enjoyed this level of jank since it required me to experiment with the limited mechanics and platforming. I'm not saying it's deep, but I'm a weirdo who likes to mess around, and this just happens to tickle a specific part of my brain, regardless of how small it may be. But the changes they made to the gameplay are things that are in the right direction, but it's more of a failure of not pushing the envelope more. And hey, I think the boss fights are at least a good direction too. At one point in the game, after you get the rank in the system, you're kidnapped by the legendary Pokemon Zygarde, brought up to the roof in probably one of the most awkward cutscenes in the game, and you're now forced to fight against a giant Mega Absol, though you do have yourself a Lucario that can Mega Evolve to fight back. After this, there are a few missions that crop up where you have to fight against other rampaging Mega Evolution Pokemon. Typically, you go to the area they're at, one of your fellow members of Team MZ will join you in battle, and bada bing bada boom, you're battling a huge Pokemon. On a presentation style, there's a bit of a downgrade from the noble Pokemon from Legends Arceus, whereas each of those bosses were given their own introductory cutscene and have a lot of care put into them, even having unique arenas given to them where you have to dodge and throw bombs at them. Meanwhile, the rogue Mega Evolution Pokemon have you transport to a void with different flavor of floor on it, which I don't really get why this has to be this way. Much like how I demonstrated in the wild Pokemon changing the terrain and how that can be done, why not have the rampaging wild Pokemon do the same thing? You could have the areas you fight them be affected by their elemental properties, adding personality and flair to the city, or you could have them tearing up the streets when you fight them there. There could be a lot more done here to improve the presentation of the city and the fights. Mechanically, I feel like there's a bit of a step up here from Legend Arceus, and I'm not just talking about the fact that there are 5 bosses like you had in Arceus when you got about 16 in this game. And to be frank, it's not like they just upped the size of these Pokemon and made them bog standard battles.
Legends Arceus wasn't, like, really difficult, I would say, but, like, it had boss fights in it that, like, actually changed up the combat. Like, you could, like, the bosses genuinely had movesets that you could, like, you actually had to, like, you know, watch out for yourself. It was more than just turn-based combat, and I really liked that element of it. And maybe ZA has stuff like that, but it hasn't really felt like that in, like, any of the, you know, Rogue Megas or any... I haven't ran into a single fight encounter like that. In Legends Arceus, you run into an encounter like that in the first, like, I don't even know, like, 5 hours? But, like, it felt like a watered-down, like, you know, From Software type boss, and I really liked that. But ZA... it's got really nothing like that, at least that I've experienced. You know, again, I've only played 8 hours, so maybe you'll run into like the bosses like Arceus had, where it's like, you know, you actually had to be engaged with the boss's moveset, otherwise you will die. But, you know,
So, I guess you didn't reach Camerupt or Victory Bell, the Pokemon that come after the first Rogue Mega Evolution, cause while you can say that they're easy, they still do things that change up the combat a little bit. Camerupt leaving chunks of rock that will explode after some time, or Victory Bell leaving huge piles of poisonous ooze on the ground so you can't just run all willy-nilly without some care. These aren't normal moves that Pokemon have in the game, and if you want to say that these are easy, yeah, I'll agree, because these are the first 4 of the bosses. They aren't going to throw the toughest bosses against you right at the start. That's honestly pretty common in game design, especially when it's tied to the story. And at the very least, the rogue Pokemon do have their own unique movesets and trappings. Take for example Beedrill. Right from the start, it'll swarm you with smaller Kakuna that will bounce around the field. Yeah, they're not fast, and if you just have your attention on Beedrill though, they will hit you with Poison Sting, which can knock out your trainer. Bayonet will create clones of itself that each have their own health bar and can still damage you with their attacks. Not to mention, this Ghost has a number of dodging moves, and from my experience tends to be more aggressive, coming after you rather than your own Pokemon. Hawlucha can be a bit simple, but if you're unable to stop its charge attack, it'll do massive ground pound damage that sends shockwaves throughout the arena and can get both you and your Pokemon at the same time. And I can go on and on. Yeah, they're not the toughest bosses, but there was some thought put into the Rogue Mega Pokemon that at least make them not the bog standard when it comes to battling. I will say there should be a lot more done with them. Like in the post game, you get a chance to refight some of them in simulated battles for training against the legendaries, and aside from a level increase, I feel like they should have added more to their kits and given them a different experience. Maybe for Hawlucha, they added Tailwind to make it faster, and you and your Pokemon are slightly slower and you have to take that into account when dodging and attacking. However, much like most of the game, I mixed on the Rogue Megas. They're not bad, but they could have been done a lot better. And hey, I did enjoy having the characters join in on the fights. Because for the most part, the characters in the game are really what sell this. I'm not talking about the character design, though one look at them and their models, you can tell there was a lot of care and put into them. They appropriately mark characters, have their own personalities, and make them memorable. Team MZ individually aren't the most dynamic or deepest characters of all gaming, but they are at the very least fun characters with their flaws, insecurities, and quirks that make them stand out from the previous friend groups in these games. Tawny is this chipper, sometimes overbearing leader of Team MZ, who basically recruits you into the team the moment you get off the train. But apparently she's also dumb because she took out a loan to make a YouTube video promoting Hotel Z, and now she's got debt that somehow roped us into it. Like, I get it, editors cost a lot of money, but don't go into debt for making a video. Naveen is a guy who loves sewing and fashion, but his grandmother didn't approve of that, wanting him to focus on his studies. Then, after his grandma threw out his sewing equipment, Naveen stormed out and lives partially at the hotel now. He's also a huge fan of the local streamer, Kanari. A little on the obsessive side of things, but oddly enough doesn't do the creepy simp things. He tends to be a bit aloof with his situations, like being dragged into the Rogue Mega Evolution stuff, which I can't really fault him for that. Kid just wants to sew and design clothes, especially for his internet idol. And then there's Lita. She likes to dance. What? She's not the worst character, but she'd probably be the least memorable to me about the team. Most I can say is she probably is related to the fat kid from X and Y who was also obsessed with dancing. There are some returning characters too. AZ, the tall bastard, is running the hotel with his special flawed. And while on a conceptual level I enjoy AZ as well as the fact that he's tied to the story, he's not really all that important to me as a character. I chalked it up to the bad writing in X and Y to me. To the narrative, yeah, he's extremely important, but there really isn't a standout scene that really comes to mind after playing the game for after 40 hours. Well, except for at the end, but he's freaking dead?! Honestly, I'm more or less interested with this guy. I'm Hell. What? To anyone who's actually played the games, especially X and Y, it shouldn't be a shock to you about who this guy is. But for those who, I don't know, skipped about 15 years of games, stopping at the first half of the Gen 5 ones, you really didn't know or care about this guy. Yeah, it's Lysander, the guy who was the leader of Team Flare. You know, the group that almost unleashed a powerful weapon that almost destroyed Lumio City 5 years ago.
How are you alive? This is ridiculous. I've blown up every other person that has worked for me in totally... Okay, I will ignore that because that wasn't a very big hit. But this... Oh, screw you in your face. You better die at the bottom of this. How are you missing things? How are you missing things? Hit it! Why are you invincible? This doesn't make any sense!
L's story in the game is one of him attempting redemption, even though he lost his memory and may have been cursed with the same longevity stuff that AZ had, if his hair's an indicator. It's a side effect from the ultimate weapon. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Lysander, and not just because of the fact that I keep misspelling his name in my script, but back in X and Y, he was an effective villain. In those games, they treated him like a non-related party to Team Flare when just looking at the guy would tell you, dude, your hair gives it away. And the games then act like it's a big twist that he turned out to be the leader of an evil team. As a villain, he was weak. But ignore my issues with X and Y, in ZA, despite the fact that he doesn't remember his past, he seeks to do right and save the city, doing what he can by collecting Zygarde cells for the players. I've seen better, quote-unquote, redemption arcs, but for Lysander here, I thought it was a great direction for his character. Then we get to the equivalents to the gym leaders in this game, the team leaders who have your matches against you in the ZA Royale. They're fun characters and aren't really carbon copies of cardboard cutouts of characters, especially in comparison to some of the gym leaders of past Pokemon games. Take for example Kanari, the aforementioned streamer that Naveen likes. You have to start off by doing a quiz that basically has Naveen helping you out in order to find her and request a battle against her. She's using a holographic projection of herself, cause, well, we all know what happens when Sims go wild. But it turns out that the holographic projection was actually Kanari's grandfather, Tarragon. Dear God, we've just been catfished. And it turns out Kanari's a big egotistical brat who apparently makes you jump through hoops to challenge her even though she's the one who signed up for this damn competition. She's a terrible person, and I actually like that. I've railed on the past about obnoxious characters.
Jesus, I shot myself!
But the difference between these two bluish-haired women is that one of them pretty much forced me to interact with them for the entire game, and the other one doesn't get shoved down my throat. And I think that's a good thing. Not every character in Pokemon should be sunshine and rainbows. You should have some unlikable pricks and spoiled brats, which, Anyway, I'm not gonna go through all the characters since that'd make this video way too long and I've already tanked my retention time with everything already in the first chapter, but I will bring up my favorite character, and that'd be Corbo. And I have no idea if I'm saying his name right. He's the boss of the Rust Syndicate, a local mafia/loan shark agency, and he's the one who lent Tawny all that money I brought up to make her YouTube video, and then basically charged her insane interest. Over $1 million Poké-Dollars! I mean, just give me a few days in the battle zones and I'm sure I can make that money back quick. There, I can clear Tawny's debt easily. Not only does Corbo have a wicked design, but I love the concept of a loan shark character in Pokemon. And at first, if you're familiar with Pokemon, you should probably think that they're the evil team of the game. Wouldn't be the first time. And
predators who enslave you through predatory loans, and guess what? They're the good guys! Yes, the predatory loan sharks are good guys! The heroes of the game. How, you ask? Well, of course, the indentured servitude, the literal slavery, because you are not paid, and it is not clear when, if ever, the debt would ever be repaid, is actually community service. They're making you do good things. guys. Can we talk about for just a second how insane this is?
The game makes it pretty clear that debt is not a good thing. Hell, this is actually a pretty Western view on the whole concept, since Corbo plays the whole honorable Yakuza boss trope, keeping debts and steps up in times of crisis, even if their methods aren't really on the level. Corbo is essentially the Pokemon version of Kazuma Kiryu or Akiyama. Kiryu was effectively doing the same thing. He was a debt collector. Corbo extorts and helps people in equal measure because that's what his archetype is supposed to do. You shouldn't take on debts to make something as stupid as a YouTube video, which the game makes it very clear you should not do. You only need to look at the Rust Syndicate to realize there's an obviously huge Japanese Yakuza theme going on with this team. The decorations like the Hisuian Sneasel looking like a Lucky Cat statue, the Japanese paper walls, the frickin' Zen garden you fight Corbo on, or how about the fact that this is a Japanese game and the Rust Syndicate's building is a blatant sore thumb in the city resembling of Yakuza compounds, making it stand out in Pokemon version of France. Kiryu would not approve.
Just think it's a bit silly that the giant evil mega corporation is trying to teach our children that debt collectors are good, and that tricking someone into going into debt is super cool and fun.
I'd also like to point out that the game explicitly states before the Mega Starmie fight that Corbo was actually targeted by the Rust Syndicate because he got money from Lysander, and he kicked their asses. And apparently not just in Pokemon battles either. So he became the leader, reforming them to be more of a shadowy hand that helps Lumiose from the back alleys. Yeah, he's trying to help Lumiose City, but his debt tactics aren't on the level. It's not framed as a good thing. There's shades of gray. Besides, you get revenge in the best scene of the game, where near the end, the Rust Syndicate and Corbo have to form a human ladder for you, and you can make them do it again and again.
I will fucking kill you if you jump off this roof, brat!
There's another character I do want to talk about, and that's probably one of the characters I outright hated in this game. Jason. I actually like her design, since it's a pretty stark contrast to the rest of the game, but the character is... how do I put this politely? Batshit insane!
You're batshit insane!
When Tawny decides that you and her don't have time to deal with the tournament that Jacene is hosting, because, you know, the town is being attacked by Mega Evolution Pokemon. I mean, I wish that choice was my thing, but whatever, gotta go save the day. So as we're doing the usual strategy meeting, something is wrong. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people? Ah! Jacene's here! And then after this, she begins to stalk you, appearing in holographic form after you defeat the Mega Evolutions, and to top it off, she basically traps the entire hotel in a holographic barrier area, much like the Wild and Trainer arenas. Oh, and lest we forget that she basically turned the Dragon Pokemon user, Laban, into a maid, and she pretty much trapped everyone else in the room where the tournament was going to take place until you agreed to participate. I know for a fact that a lot of people like this character, and I can't stand her because of these things. And that's a good choice. The cast of ZA, especially the ones you meet on the ZA Royale, actually have flaws to their personalities. They feel real. I mean, some of them are stalkers and such, but it's not just the designs that make them stand out, and the fact you actually spend time outside of just challenging them helps establish them as main characters. It makes them and the story feel a lot more lively. Which, extra warning for spoilers. Pokemon Legends ZA's story isn't exactly the deepest or most thought-provoking of gaming, but it at least attempts to try something different, especially for the rest of the series of Pokemon. Once you get the Mega Ring, the city will on time be under the attack of rogue Mega Pokemon, and Team MZ is recruited by Quasar Tico Inc. to stop them. In between that, you're climbing the ranks of the ZA Royale in order to become the best Mega Evolution user. Now, the question is, why the hell are we doing this? It turns out there are two things. The first is that the winner of the ZA Royale gets one wish fulfilled by Quasar Tico Inc. And obviously a lot of people want to get that wish. The second is to find someone who actually take the reins from AZ to help his Floette gain her Mega Evolution and fight against an ancient machine called Angie, which is located in the Prism Tower, initially created as a countermeasure to protect Kalos from outside forces. 2,000 years ago, during the events of XY, Lysander hoped to utilize Angie as well as the ancient weapon that he had during the DS game's events. But without the Eternal Flower Floette, Lysander couldn't utilize it. But thanks to the idiot using the ultimate weapon, it caused Angie to reawaken and unleash Mega Power throughout the city of Lumiose, which not only created the rogue Mega Evolutions, but also drew in wild Pokemon that are taking over parts of the city. And
Plot of the game is ooh, Rogue Mega Evolution and ooh, wild Pokemon going crazy. And there's a mega corporation that's setting up the wild zones to keep in all of these wild Pokemon. And they're in control of Lumiose Tower, which no one can enter and is emitting strange energy. And as a player, you're immediately like, oh, they're evil, right? The mega corporation controls everything, creates wild areas throughout the city where you take an apartment complex and a small business, and it is now surrounded by dangerous Pokemon that attack you on sight. You now have to fight for your life just to go home. So clearly these guys must be evil, right? Nope, they're not evil either. Nobody's evil. The game does not have an evil team, doesn't even have any bad guys. There are no villains in this game. This is what I'm talking about, where I'm saying the game might as well not have a story. The villain of the game, if you call it that, is just big old guy made a defense structure for the evil team back in Gen 6, and now it's going crazy.
I feel like I just lost a few brain cells. First off, AZ didn't make the weapon back in Generation 6, he made it 2,000 years ago before the story even happened. Secondly, Quasar Tico isn't strictly a bad guy in the story. What they're doing is actually very controversial, and we get scenes and characters outright saying that they're against this redevelopment plan. Ivor of the Fists of Justice doesn't approve of them, neither does Corbo, and we see that there are people who are actually willing to attack the CEO of Quasar Tico over this. Quasar Tico aren't the bad guys in the overall story, but they're not exactly the good guys either. And that's mainly due to the fact that they don't know how to really stop this stuff from happening. The story makes it clear that wild Pokemon are flocking to the city, possibly because of Angie, and Quasar Tico is trying to cordon off areas to contain the Pokemon in them. They're putting up the guise of the city for people in Pokemon, when it's a public face with a crisis that's about to happen that basically goes, oh god, the Pokemon are invading Lumiose and we can't let the public know or else panic will happen. God help me. And thirdly, do we really need another evil corporation as the bad guy in these games? Throughout the history of Pokemon, we've had evil organizations as the main antagonists, especially in the last few generations that actually were the bad guys. Just to name a few, the big example, in Generation 6, Lysander was the head of Lysander Labs, a very lucrative company that was used to help fund Team Flare. Or how about Sun and Moon? You know, the games where Lusamine went insane and used the Aether Foundation to open wormholes because she was obsessed with Ultra Beasts and freezing Pokemon for some reason? Or Macrocosmosis. Technically, they're run by the idiot that was Chairman Rose and aren't explicitly evil, but they abused their power and wealth to solve an issue that was rushed by the chairman. Not to mention, evil company or evil organization is a cliched element, even in the Pokemon games. Do we really need to have one in every single game? Even then, the Pokemon games have always had a utopian vibe to them. In Generation 1 we had Silph Co., which created a ton of goods for the region of Kanto. In Gen 3, the Devon Corporation created the Pokénav and running shoes. But I guess this is propaganda! You just have to ignore what the story is telling you. You have to ignore the past of Pokemon and not even get things right. Hell, one of the biggest themes is actually tackling the whole humans and Pokemon could live in harmony that has been a part of the series since its inception. Back in Generation 3, there was Rust Turf Tunnel between Rustboro City and Verdant Turf Town, making a trade and travel much easier. But because the tunnel was home to Whismur and the construction was causing discomfort to them, the project was cancelled halfway. And now you just got some guy breaking stones with his bare hands because he wants to see his girlfriend. It's an overly utopic view since in our own real world we wouldn't have had a second thought about that. At best, we'd probably relocate the little buggers and smash that mountain into the ground in the process. So when Lumiose City is having a Pokemon invasion, causing problems for the citizens, such as a group of Trubbish hanging at a cafe or scaring customers away because of their smell, or Spinnerack basically capturing people in cocoons, it's gonna cause problems. And yeah, the side quest where you lead the Trubbish away is simple and not exciting, but has a purpose if you're actually trying to engage with the story and themes of the game. Even if humans and Pokemon can live together in harmony, it doesn't mean they have to live together in the same place. And that's what I feel like a lot of people who are actually going through this game aren't actually doing. They're not actually engaging with what the game has to offer and are only looking at it via surface level of things. Which, hey, if you're just trying to get through a game, I totally get it, especially when there are probably tons of other better games out there. But it really feels like people are just going through the motions or listening to what a big viewed video has to say about that and taking it as gospel. If there's one thing I don't really care for in the story is the false choices. Typically, this is something you see in a lot of games where they give you 2 or 3 choices in a dialogue balloon, but no matter what you choose, you remain on the path. Typically, I'm not too upset with these things, but when we get to the end of the story, we have to battle Tawny for the person to connect with Flawed, have her Mega evolve, and go up to stop Angie from activating. But regardless if you win or lose, Tawny just takes your spot and she goes up to, well, admittedly, she fails to save the day, so maybe it was a good idea we didn't go up there. I feel like this is where the choices should have mattered. Like earlier in the video, I brought up how if you were given a choice to skip or grind out the rest of the ranks, that could have helped too. Maybe only one trainer could have gotten that treatment. And if you took it, Tawny would have been a little bit mad that she wasn't the chosen one for it. And so when you face off, whether or not you win, she thinks that you skipping the hard work she puts in, that you are not worth going up to stop Angie. Gives a bit more characterization, and makes the choice not hurt so much since this actually makes Tawny come off as a jerk. But justified. But that's just me and my brain thinking of ways to actually make the game stand out a little bit more. To me, while the story isn't the greatest out there, it's not going to change my life or wow me. It was at least something that gave me thought about how drastically life can change, how the past can affect what we do today, and many other things. Am I romanticizing it a bit? Hell yeah I am, but at least the story is cohesive and the characters that I've already discussed certainly made it a lot more entertaining, which I do have to say, I think every character in the story at the very least added some level of entertainment to the game. Ah, the music of the game. To be frank, when it comes to Pokemon, they typically do have great music tracks to their games, and ZA is no different. The 2 most tracks you'll hear are the Roaming Day theme, and the Night theme. While they're both really good themes that add the ambiance of the city, I do wish that we could change up the music throughout the game. Like maybe give us some headphones so we can change the tunes while exploring the city, cause I can imagine that if you're experiencing the game in large doses, that music will drive you insane. At the very least, the music does change when you fight. The battle theme is arguably very catchy and high-paced and works well with the new battle system. Also having the original Pokemon battle theme in there, but remixed. One thing I really appreciate is that each of the major trainers have their own theme too. Here's Corbo's, Ivor's, Canary, and probably one of my favorites, Lysander's. Which has a really great contrast when you consider his original theme from X and Y. They sound so similar, but it's obviously in the XY games has a more sinister tone because he's the evil bad. All the while, the ZA version has a more noble theme to it, highlighting the fact that Lysander is actually improved as a person and trying to fix his mistakes. There are a few tracks that are specifically lifted from the original XY games, like the hotel whose name I cannot pronounce to save my life. Now, we do need to talk about the elephant in the room because it's something that pretty much everyone has raised a stink about: the lack of voice acting. I'd rather not play a clip from another review because to some level I agree with this point. Voice acting should be a thing in Pokemon. Hell, we already have voice actors in Pokemon as a franchise. Look towards the anime and the animations they put out. Like here's one with Lysander.
I would make this world unchanging and eternal. This world will eventually reach the point of no return. Carlos is beautiful right now. I can't stand the thought of the world becoming uglier.
The funny thing is, while I think voice acting would be appropriate for the game, we do have a bit of an explanation. It's an older one, but one I think it's worth bringing up. Director Shigeru Omori said the following. There's two sorts of main reasons. So firstly, this is an RPG with a whole lot of text that we're then localizing and releasing in 9 different languages at the same time. So from a purely practical point of view, actually getting that organized and carrying out all the voice recording, the corrections, and so on in 9 different languages for release on exactly the same day is something that would be incredibly difficult. So that's one reason why we haven't chosen to do it this time around. But the other reason is character image. In the sense of when you play a game, if you've got a voice on that character that instantly provides to the player an image, a feel for that character that they don't generate themselves, it's pushed onto them from the developmental side. Whereas if we have really flavorful text for those characters but no voice, the players can kind of create their own image of who that character is as they're playing. And that's something we really like to encourage as we're creating games. The first one I can somewhat understand, considering that Pokemon has now gone to a worldwide release. It would be a hassle to incorporate to who knows how many languages into the game and finding appropriate actors and actresses for it. That being said, this is a reason, not an excuse. This came out for Sword and Shield, and when there were plans for Legends Arceus to be voiced somewhat, not to play the 2025 card, but it's 2025. We've had several games that have single audio cast for it. Yakuza being a prime example where so many of its titles have strictly been Japanese, but there's this magical thing called subtitles that are already in the game. And I'm not even saying that you need to make every line voiced. Character introductions, grunts, animated cutscenes, it's possible to make this work. Hell, if you don't want to dub everything for every language available, take the Klonoa route and have the characters speak in a fictional language. You already made yourself a fictional alphabet for the world of Pokemon, so why not do it for the language? It'd save money and improve the presentation of the games. Or just keep the games in Japanese, and have subtitles doing the translating for you. If you're worried about names, just have names that would fit the region. We're talking Pokemon France here, so go with French names. But whatever, regardless of what the games do with voice acting, at least there isn't a Piers moment. Now, just because I believe that the games do need voice acting doesn't actually impact the story, especially the more emotional moments. It's going to be different for everyone, but I grew up with games where voice acting really wasn't a thing, at least the more popular titles. Having PS1 and such games that didn't have proper voice acting in them, it didn't affect my enjoyment of the story. Now, does voice acting add to the experience? I mean, even bad voice acting can add to it.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
Yakuza! Don't fuck with Kazuki-san!
How many times I gotta tell you, I'm not Yakuza. You're just deaf.
So long as they're human, because I've seen some people talking about adding AI voices to the game, and that would make it work. Look, I don't want AI in my Pokemon games unless it's a Porygon. Oh yeah, Porygon's not in this game. Which, to some degree, I understand, because Pokemon, despite the changes this game does, at the core is still the same. You go in, you catch the Pokemon, you evolve them, you unlock their evolutions, and then you get their Mega Evolutions. I've seen a few complaints about how new Pokemon weren't actually introduced in this game. Understandable to an extent. Legend Arceus did introduce regional variants, had some original Pokemon, and introduced a few new evolutions like Ursaluna. There weren't a lot of new Pokemon added to the roster, but I can see the complaint having some water. Now, you could say that because of the Mega Evolution energy flowing through Lumiose, it caused some Pokemon to mutate, evolve, or whatever, as a means of explaining away why these new Pokemon weren't introduced in the 6th generation. Granted, I don't know how to really feel about that, especially since the Mega Energy attracts Pokemon to the city and also allowed several new Pokemon to gain Mega Evolutions.
Disgusting!
I wouldn't want it to be more of a MacGuffin than it already is, though. Got a few too many in this franchise already. But let's actually talk about the Pokemon. We've got about 230 Pokemon in the base game, with a good chunk of them getting their Mega Evolutions. It's not a great number of Pokemon, but it's enough to allow people to have diverse teams for their playthroughs and online competition. Alright, I've danced around it enough, let's actually talk about the Pokemon designs, particularly the Mega Evolutions. Much like anything when it comes to design work, you'll either have some amazing designs, some middling designs, some what the hell am I looking at designs, and then Mega Starmie. Now, I'm gonna be straight up, I've never been a huge fan of Mega Evolutions, the concept to be precise. And that's because I've always found any Pokemon that has a Mega Evolution to be stuck with that, and not really getting anything else afterwards. I don't fully believe that now since regional forms were a thing, but I'm still not a fan of the concept. It's a super powered up form that's a temporary thing, like going Super Saiyan. Only instead of growing more hair, you get new details and sometimes go upside down. When it comes to creature design, every sort of monster catcher as such will have its ups and downs. That's the beauty of this. I know a ton of people hate Mega Starmie, and while I think it breaks a ton of design conventions even for Mega Evolution, the fact that it's an Ultraman and Earthbound reference is enough for me to understand the thought process. I still don't like it, but that's okay. If you know anything though, not every Mega Evolution ever introduced in the series makes a return. You're lacking the Hoenn starters, Mewtwo's 2 Megas, Groudon and Kyogre, and the frickin' menace that is Mega Rayquaza ain't here. Now here's where I need to talk about some leaks and spoilers, so if you're not down for that, you can skip to the next chapter. Go on, I'll give you a few moments to get there. Yeah, that's it. Go on, we'll just go about our business, and are they gone? Good. I hate that guy. So, thanks to the leaks, we've learned that quite a few new Pokemon are going to be reintroduced to the game via DLC, including select mons from the Paldea region. At the time of me making this, we've actually seen one Mega Evolution for our Gen 9 Pokemon. Some of them, and including some Pokemon that are already in the game, are going to get additional Mega Evolutions like Garchomp and Lucario. I'm only bringing this up because while I think it's a crime against nature that Flygon still hasn't gotten a Mega Evolution yet, it shows there are plans on expanding onto the game with a $30 DLC. But that being said, I can't talk about the DLC because it's not out. You can pre-order and get a costume, but in a technical sense, it's not the typical day one DLC. I am not a fan of this practice, but if we're looking towards previous entries of Pokemon, Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet, the moment that there's additional content added, the Pokemon get added to the games via an update. While I can't be completely sure about that at this point, there's nothing to really suggest otherwise that you can't transfer or trade Pokemon without buying the DLC. Granted, any Pokemon you transfer into ZNA can't be transferred back, and I don't know why that's the case, but maybe I just lack the imagination the big boys that Nintendo have. That being said, I'm not fully on board with this DLC practice, day one or not. I've seen some people say that developers basically lopped off the DLC portion of the game and are planning on selling it back to you, but I've yet to see some actual proof of that being the case. It's mostly people saying that ZA is an incomplete experience, not help that they decided to showcase Mega Raichu X and Y before the game came out, and that $30 price tag on the DLC isn't something I'm a huge fan of. However, I find it a bit dishonest as to how many people are crying out in the dead of night that the total cost of Pokemon Legends ZA is $120, including the DLC and the $20 from Nintendo Online to get the Megastones with the Kalos starters, locking Mega Evolution behind a paywall, as it were. Though one person thought including the price of the Switch 2 was also a good idea to make it a $150 game. Listen, I hate how DLC is done nowadays, especially how Pokemon has done it. Multiple times at this point, even making it that you had to buy individual DLC packs for the Pokemon titles, but let's not act like the DLC gives a complete experience for the game, or that it's necessary to enjoy it. I can attest to that myself. Even if it were, the same people who bring up these complaints about DLC will still shell out the new Digimon game, all the while ignoring the different editions that can cost up to $120 itself, and the DLC music, which for at least one user pointed out if you refund it, it bricks your save. But Kamen, a lot of that DLC is cosmetic. Why are you attacking Digimon? First off, I don't care if it's cosmetic. Day one DLC like this is something I don't like, and two, it's more or less showing a double standard from where I'm standing. Digimon isn't the one on fire, it's a loose double standard of people who bring it up. I'm not attacking Digimon, I can only talk about the game based on what I have access to and can look up information on. It's probably a great game with the nouveau in it for some reason, but if we're gonna call out shitty business practices, it has to be done in equal measure. You can't just pick and choose. Even if the Digimon game is done better than Pokemon, these DLC practices and special editions shouldn't get a free pass or act like it's doing it better than Pokemon. If not that, then explain why it's an exception instead of it just ignoring it. I just don't appreciate either form of DLC, and I think it's a bit of a terrible practice, especially nowadays. Details matter, and I think it's important to have some level of standard in that regard, and it feels unbalanced in this situation. Back to the actual game, I think it's important to realize there are a lot of details that people won't actually take into account. They'll just look at the buildings through someone's review or playthrough and think there's nothing good in the game and it's only looking like this all the time.
I have special eyes.
Look with your special eyes.
My brand!
When we first enter the city, you'll see all these posters that have unique advertisements. Hotel Z has plenty of homely details that make it feel like an actual hotel with a unique atmosphere. The museum being a love letter to Legends Arceus, and giving me a bit of an existential crisis because apparently Volo is still alive, and the museum decided to take some random guy's dirty clothes and put them on display because I don't know why. Going around town, you can find unique manhole covers that have unique art styles and are referenced to actual Pokemon manhole covers in our world. There are plenty of statues of Pokemon around the city, and you have to interact with one in order to get into the sewers for the first time. And the trainer customization. Dear Arceus, there are a ton of options this time around. From being able to dye your hair in certain places, to the amount of clothes you can wear and such. I do wish we could change out body types, but back on the point, the clothes themselves have unique elements to them. For example, there are shirts that look like parodies of movies, like Yamper with your standard dog movie, or the Sharpedo used for the Jaws movie, or Tarantum Island being an obvious call out to Jurassic Park. There are a lot of details in the game if you actually look, but I understand how the windows and doors look like they're painted on the buildings, and considering how much people interact with the world in that regard, I don't blame them to an extent. However, you got things like the lighting in the game are really well done. It can add a lot of extra to the atmosphere. On a performance end, as I stated at the beginning of this mess of a video, I experienced it on the Switch too. I didn't have bugs, didn't have any lagging, and nothing too bad like how it was with Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet. No major glitches, didn't get stuck between NPCs. There was one time where I fell off the roof and got stuck between a building and a lamppost, but the screen went black and got me on the main road again a few seconds later. One thing I've noticed is that there's always a number of people who will try to take a clip or two of a glitch and make it out to be like it affects everyone. And don't get me wrong, those glitches shouldn't happen, but it's hard to really get a grasp of how bad it is. Looking at Scarlet and Violet, there are tons of bugs that people could amass into videos and have tons of views to this very day. I can't really say for this iteration though, but maybe because I haven't looked, because Arceus knows how long it took me to get this video out. There are lots of little changes here and there in the game, whether it be the customization of the character, the world itself, or improvements that have actually been done from the previous Switch titles. Sure, the scope of the world is obviously smaller, that is a detriment, and ZA does have issues since there should have been a lot more indoor dungeons for the world to explore. But one of the bigger issues from the previous Legends game was that while there was a lot of different locations, they had the issue of the open world being a fairly empty place. At least it felt that way to me. That isn't to say that ZA doesn't have its issues, it clearly does, and I think a lot more landmarks in the city as well as making the streets a lot more visually distinct would go a long way. With that said though, what are my actual thoughts on the full game? And what about the reaction? Well, if you couldn't tell by the massive amount of times I referenced other reviews throughout this video, and me pointing out issues of things I felt that were ignored or even straight up dishonest at some points, I don't fully agree with the online consensus on either side of this game. You either think this game is perfect and great, or you think that this is emblematic of Nintendo's greed and no one should be playing this game unless they're pirating it. It's honestly become as vitriolic as American politics on Twitter, only somehow even dumber because we're arguing about a frickin' Pokemon game. And I don't think I'd have too much of a problem with it if it wasn't for the fact that some people are literally attacking others for buying the game. You got the Roach King of streaming basically calling anyone who bought the game the hard R word that'll get me skewered by the comments if I say it, and you'll also have people who think that Metacritic is enough to represent the online opinion of the game. Yeah, because it's not like the concept of review bombing isn't a thing, or that people clearly didn't understand that switching your Pokemon during mid-battle and getting hit by your opponent has been a part of the game since Red and Blue. Does that mean all negative reviews are review bombing? No, but that doesn't mean that we should take everything from this site as gospel. But yeah, there's never a middle ground with these sorts of things nowadays. Willing to bet there's going to be a few comments down below who are basically calling me a shill or I'm defending the billion-dollar company. I have to ask, how is it actually helping the situation in the video game industry? One of the biggest issues in gaming is the overbloated cost of game development, especially in today's climate. And if the leaks are true, then this game basically had a shoestring budget to make it. Does that mean it's a good thing? Yes and no. Yes, because game companies need to learn to not spend so much money on experiences that ultimately do nothing but raise the prices of their products. And no, not only because I'm expected to pay $70 for this game and the quality isn't up to snuff for that price, but if the budget is what the leaks said, then the game shouldn't be costing this much. Regardless of that, let me ask you, what does insulting the fans accomplish? Because normally people aren't receptive to insults and being treated like dirt for buying a game. This does nothing to fix the issues of the gaming industry and acts as a smokescreen to discuss the actual problems with it. There's a conversation here and we should demand more for our money, but attacking other people over buying a game isn't going to fix any of that. All it's going to do is make people not want to listen to you and discount anything you say. There's no reason to do it, and all you're doing is being incendiary to people and driving them away. I could care less if someone dislikes the game or likes it. The only reason I would bring it up if there's misinformation, or if I think a point is dumb, and since these are public videos, I'm allowed to respond and vice versa. Is the game worth $60 to $70? I don't think so, unless you're looking for Mabel feet pics in the game. Is it a terrible game? Not in the slightest if you ask me. Is it the best Pokemon game? No, I wouldn't say that. Do I care about the windows and doors being painted on the walls? No, I don't really care. What I would say is that it's actually a pretty decent game that has done some things right to improve Pokemon, and it's done things that were wrong. There are improvements, there are issues, and I wouldn't recommend it to people unless you're a diehard Pokemon fan looking for a fix in the official thing, like a junkie. It'd be silly of me to dismiss the obvious issues in this game, but even more ridiculous to ignore the positives that this game does bring, and actually give attention to both of these elements of a game to come to the conclusion that while Nintendo sucks as a company, the game has positive elements to it. It's just that it falls short from being something I'd recommend, especially with a steep asking price. In any case, I'm going to end this video here. I know I haven't covered everything in this game, but since I'm on page 40 of the script, at this point I'm tired of talking about the game and a discussion about it. Games are meant to be fun, and so is making videos for me. But at this point I'd rather be savaged by wild Pokemon than deal with online war that this game has caused, and will most likely add to the fuel to the fire with this video. And then in about a week's time, everyone's going to forget about this and complain about something else. I'm sure that's fun. For someone. I'm MangaKamen. Good night.